years in terrorist captivity. In late August of 2011, Taseer was driving to his office in Lahore, Pakistan, when he was dragged from his car at gunpoint and kidnapped by members of the Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan, a Taliban-affiliated terrorist group. What happened next is the subject of my first interview of the morning. Delighted to be joining me live on the line from Pakistan, I believe, is Taseer. Shahbaz, good morning or good afternoon to you.
It's lunchtime for me, but thank you for having me, Giles.
The pleasure is all mine. It's good to see you. Tell us a little bit of this is a jaw-dropping story, quite unbelievable. But for those who don't know you and your background, explain, because obviously there had been a set of tragic circumstances leading up to your abduction.
Yes. So 6 months before I was kidnapped, my father was murdered in Islamabad, the capital of Pakistan. He was the serving governor of the Punjab, which is in population terms the largest province in Pakistan. And he was murdered for defending a woman falsely accused of blasphemy. And in his support for her, he actually questioned the draconian blasphemy laws of Pakistan and asked for them to be amended. He was murdered in the capital city, and 6 months afterwards, on my way to work, as you said, early in the morning, I was abducted by a group called the IMU, which is an Uzbek militant group linked to the Taliban and later to ISIS. And they abducted me in broad daylight right outside my office, about 10 armed, masked men. And what led to, me fighting for my life for the next 4.5 years.
When you were dragged from your car, you must have thought, your immediate thought, apart from shock kicking in, is the fact that this could be over. I could be, my father was assassinated for appealing against the, as you said, the draconian rights. You must have thought this was a militant band who were just going to finish it for you then.
The absolutely worst part, when I was attacked, So the worst part when I was attacked was I presumed it was a carjacking. And, that's something that's common around the world. And it's probably the first thing that comes to you, if something like this happens. But as soon as they put me in the back of the car, I remember that the man who eventually turned out to be my kidnapper, he turned around while I was pleading and saying, "You've taken my money, you've taken my car, just let me go, I won't call the police." And he turned around and said, "Shahbaz, I've come for you." And a kind of fear that I've never felt in my life, this very eerie feeling sort of crept in. And I had unfortunately just come from a work trip from Dubai. And on the flight, I watched A Mighty Heart, which is about the abduction and murder of Daniel Pearl. So I think it's like the worst movie you can watch, if you're going to get kidnapped. But unfortunately, I didn't have any foresight. But yeah, and so I had this haunting sense of fear that I've never been able to explain. How does this man know my name? And while I'm trying to process this, they started injecting me with ketamine and knocked me out. And the next time that I woke up was 3 days later in a place that I found out 6 months later was a place called Mir Ali, which is in Waziristan, probably after Afghanistan, the most lawless, godless area with the most godless men in the area. And I spent almost 3 years there, a year in Afghanistan and 6 months in this godforsaken valley called Shaval Valley, where we were bombed mercilessly by NATO. And I say we because by that time I was running with these people. So yeah, it was just, it's something that feeling is something that I've never been able to explain.
You mentioned that the film you were watching on the way over from Dubai, which is the Angelina Jolie film, isn't it? The Daniel the film about the kidnapping.
Sorry, Giles,
And so a lot of us, Pakistan we only seem to get news out of Pakistan when it's bad news, and it sort of. It doesn't, the politics and the tribal, I suppose, of Pakistan are so confusing to a Westerner that it only seems we always only get bad news out of there. And yet there are people like yourself and your father trying to make Pakistan progressive.
my father was probably, the day he was murdered, everybody said that probably the last progressive voice in Pakistan has been silenced. I don't get so demoralized by this. The thing about having these martyrs and having these heroes is that the reason that they give their life is to inspire another generation, is to inspire hope. And I always believe that, Pakistan is a conservative country, but it's not an extremist country. And we are a progressive people. We've always been a progressive people, whether it's in the field of poetry, whether it's in mathematics, in any form of it. This is one of the most beautiful regions in the world. And so I've never given up hope for progressive Pakistan. As a matter of fact, I live here, I work here, even after my experience, even after losing my father. I have never allowed myself to get demoralized by any of the events. And all of us have to have that mentality if we want our country to succeed. You cannot let a few bearded men with guns dictate the image of this country. And unfortunately, what happens is usually a minority that's armed and violent will represent a majority that is different and silent. And so, we live here and fight what we think is the good fight every single day, refusing to give up or accepting some of, these laws, some of this very backward mindset in our society. And, and in that, I believe that you will never let the dream of a progressive Pakistan die.
So when you came to 3 days later and, had the effects of the drug had worn off, what did they say immediately what they wanted? Or you just literally and physically kept in the dark? And what was your were you in the dark in both senses?
I was literally, there's a very famous Al Pacino line where he says, "I'm in the dark here." And I literally, besides being in this complete solitary state, I was also getting used to very strange surroundings. For example, I was handcuffed. That's something I've never experienced in my life. My legs were cuffed. No access to bathroom, no air conditioner, fan, heating, nothing. And it's complete darkness and no one is answering any questions. No one is answering any of your questions. And also, if you ask a question, the trouble is that the guards come in and start berating you and beating you. There's also a language barrier because they're Uzbek and I'm Pakistani. So it was, I just remember when I woke up, I was burning with a thirst because of the ketamine that they'd been injecting in me for 3 days. And there was some water lying there and I just picked it and I drank it. And when I asked for more water, the man who was my guard, he gave me the most sinister smile and I'll never forget it. And this very disheartened feeling set in because I realized that's all the water I'm going to get for the day. And so, it was very difficult. You come from a life where you have access to things. You can you're bound and you're
Yeah, and we seem to have lost. I thought this might happen because, unfortunately.
Oh, I'm sorry, Giles.
Yeah, sorry, you cut out briefly.
I hope you can hear me.
Yeah, you just said you'd come from a life where presumably you were used to having access to water. Was it just a couple of questions I'll give because I don't want to lose you completely, but. Presumably for these Uzbeks,
yeah.
We always say that, bearded men with guns and we have this picture of them. But for them, you were this picture of this, despised liberalism, of Western leaning culture, of everything that they, through their particular view of the world, think is evil. And they see their cause as just. And obviously you're a symbol for that and not seeing you as a human being.
That's correct. And as a matter of fact, for them, I was a representation of the jihad that they were fighting. So, they used to, I remember what they used to call me an infidel. And I'd never been called an infidel because I'm a Muslim. So, it's so strange that for example, you're Christian or you're Jewish or whatever your religion is. It's so weird if somebody else comes and says, you have nothing to do with us. As a matter of fact, our jihad is against people like you. And you're like, but I pray and I identify as a Muslim. How can you say this, and how can you take my entire life away and demand a ransom of me? None of this is actually allowed in Islam, which is why it's funny. So they brand you an infidel to allow themselves this kind of violence and abducting people for money.
The book is called, the subtitle is called A Memoir of Faith, Family and 5 Years. The faith. You said you were a Muslim. You've been called an infidel. I'm sorry for using that word again. But presumably you drew on this faith. And if you didn't think you had it before, was it a case of it absolutely in your darkest moments that you reinforced your faith and in your particular faith as opposed to their idea of faith?
The thing was, I couldn't understand, why is someone doing this to me? Why is someone torturing me like this? Why is someone keeping me in such darkness by telling me that I have nothing to do with my faith and that I am actually a representation of, why they are fighting? So I started studying my faith. I started practicing my faith. I started to try and find what is it in these words that radicalizes these people. Extremists, they go to such extreme lengths. And I have to tell you, and I always say it's like an education, in 5 years you get a university diploma. So I always say that through my journey and my education, I found out that these people had absolutely nothing to do with my faith. While they were trying to tell me that I was an infidel, the only thing that I learned was that they're so far removed from the words that this book teaches that it's crazy, that we are actually on two different parallels. So I started engaging in these heavy debates with these men about the ayats in the Quran, about the sayings of the Quran, why they justified suicide bombings, why they justified war, why they justified extremism. And I started arguing with them from the very same ayats in the Quran that they used to incite young men and women to carry out these atrocious acts.